So we have about 20 minutes for questions, and we have microphones situated on either aisle, so I'll ask you just to line up behind there, and we'll alternate back and forth. I'm going to ask you to keep your questions as short as possible so we can get as many in. Let me begin by asking you a quick question. It's something we were talking about on the way over. It's one thing to reconceptualize capitalism and how capitalist economies work. It's another thing to reframe the policy debate and get politicians to start reconceptualizing what public policy implications there are. How do we do that?
Well, you know, I think the core of the enterprise is to confront the neoclassical paradigm and the policy instantiations that flow directly from it. I mean, if you accept the orthodox explanation for growth, then, as I said before, prosperity is inequality is a feature of prosperity, right? And the truth is, and you know, I spend a lot of time in the offices of United States senators and such. No one in Washington, D.C. has contested that idea in a generation. People on both the right and left have accepted these explanations. They actually do believe. President Obama is surrounded by people who believe that if wages for workers go up, that will be bad for the economy. It's absurd and untrue, but yet they believe it. And so you have to create a new theoretical framework, but also you have to derive a bunch of new heuristics and rules of thumb that policymakers can guide their thinking when they make policy. I mean, there is this, I know a lot of people have this idea that the way economic policy is made in our country is you have really smart people in dark rooms looking at really, really complicated algorithms and data and making these scientific judgments about what to do. Nothing could be further from the truth. You know, these are mostly normal people making simplistic decisions based on rules of thumb or things they heard in college or from friends or from think tanks. And if you don't own those rules of thumb and heuristics, then you don't have anything. And so I will give you one example. So, you know, a heuristic, a rule of thumb that you know, is well accepted in our society, and you know that the Speaker of the House of Representatives running all around the country using whenever the minimum wage comes up is, if you raise the price of employment, guess what happens? You get less of it, right? People believe that. Most people believe that. It just turns out not to be true, right? There's another rule of thumb that you can employ in that circumstance is that when workers have more money, businesses have more customers and need more workers. Now, depending on which of those rules of thumb you accept, you end up in a very, very different policy regime. And your fight, unless you're as rich as me, but your fight is to get the world to accept that second rule of thumb, right? That's what this is about, is getting broad acceptance in our society that in general, it's not bad for the economy when working people earn more money. And it's not necessarily good for the economy when a few people accumulate massive amounts of wealth. But make no mistake, you know, this is contested territory, right? And if you go to Washington D.C. or if you go to Olympia in Washington State, most people accept the wrong rules of thumb, and that's because, you know, look, here's the thing: it's not just because they're evil. I mean, when I look into Speaker Boehner's eyes, by the way, I do not see evil. I see confusion, because Speaker Boehner went to college. Speaker Boehner went to college about the same time I did. He took the same economics course I did from the same well-meaning professor, and that's what we were told. That is the neoclassical theory. If one thing goes up, another thing goes down. Linear, mechanistic, closed system. So if you went to college when he did and when I did, and you took an economics course, that's what they told you. It's just not true, because it's a complex system. It's like an economy. Prosperity is a consequence of a positive circle of life-like feedback loop. And when customers have more money, businesses have more customers. This is why high-wage places have low unemployment and low-wage places have high unemployment, right? The minimum wage in Alabama is much lower than it is in Washington State. If the trickle-down guys were right, their unemployment rate would be half of ours. Instead, it's double, right? There are other factors at play, I agree. But it is not true that if wages go up, employment will go down. It's more complicated than that.
Thank you for the very good presentation. And I'm very tempted to agree that we should view capitalism as more of a system of inclusion and innovation. However, when we think about individual actions, there is a little bit of a contradiction in how we view society and how capitalism works. For example, you brought up taxation. Well, society at large benefits from taxation. Individuals would have to give up their personal resources. So if we are to accept the different view of capitalist system, should we also rethink how we view society? That it's no longer composed of individuals, but there is some sort of social common good that we have to reasonably acknowledge.
Yeah, so here's the thing, is that, you know, the thing about economics is that it is how we decide who gets what and why. So if I have everything and you have nothing, one of the reasons that I can enforce that arrangement is with force, right? I can just be like, dude, if you mess with me, I will kill you, all right? And indeed, in many places in the world, that arrangement is enforced in that way, right? But if you have a slightly different political system, like we do, then we have to enforce that arrangement as a structured moral and social agreement. And if you look at the history of how this has evolved, what you always find is rich people saying some form of this: the better I do, the better it will be for you. And so the central argument that we're litigating in our society isn't should we be pro-social or anti-social. The argument we're litigating is whether by being selfish, if I am being pro-social. And the core of the trickle-down argument is that the more money I make, the better it is for you. I'm not doing this for me. I'm doing it for you. The less taxes I pay, the better it will be for you. This is literally what they're saying. Literally what they're saying. The lower taxes are on rich people, not the better it will be for rich people, the better it will be for you. And that is what people in Washington, D.C. and around the world have accepted. This idea that explains where prosperity comes from by making rich people richer. So you don't have to relitigate how people should feel about their society. What you have to relitigate is where prosperity really comes from. And the trickle-down explanation is simply a lie. It's not true. Prosperity comes from you. And the prosperity and the wealth I get is a byproduct of that. And that's what the difference is, I think.
All right. I wanted to ask, if capitalism provides a higher, more beneficial standard of living, why is it taking us so long to remove healthcare from competing companies to a more universal system such as a socialist counterparts, which directly affects lives? If that's due to, I'm assuming, a poor managerial standpoint, the wrong application of capitalism, would more or less intrusive laws work?
Yeah, so I think I understand your question, which is a super fair question, is capitalism is so great, then how come nobody has health care in our country? More or less? Yeah, okay, so here's the thing, is that there are 20 prosperous countries in the world, and every single one of them is capitalist, right? Every single one of them. There are no socialist, successful economies on planet Earth. Capitalism, on the other hand, comes in as many flavors as pie. There are all sorts of ways of operating it. And in the same ways, dirt pie tastes terrible, cherry pie tastes yummy. And you know, and a form of capitalist system, the form that we have here in our country, is not the pure form of capitalism or the right form of capitalism, the only form of capitalism. It is just what we have chosen, and mostly what we've chosen as a consequence of letting very rich and powerful people define what we have. But there is no reason why we can't have a different construction which made health care available for all Americans through a single payer program and be any less capitalistic. Healthcare is no different than roads. We build roads here, right? We have a military. That's not socialism. The Air Force is not socialism, right? You could argue that, well, geez, you know, why should I have an Air Force for you? You should have your own Air Force, right? Pick yourself up by your bootstraps. But clearly, you know, healthcare is just another piece of infrastructure that we could deploy. And indeed, if we did, it would offer benefits probably equal to or greater than having an Air Force. And we should do that. So capitalism and the tension here isn't between capitalism and non-capitalism. The tension here is between crony capitalism and real capitalism, in my opinion. And the tension between believing that if you concentrate power and wealth into few hands, that's good for everybody, or if you make the lives better for everybody, that's good for capitalism. And that's what I think is the real issue.
Yes, you mentioned, I believe, that 85% of small businesses fail within the first 18 months.
Yeah.
And then you went on to say how important it is to raise the minimum wage. Those two statements don't seem consistent. Can you speak to that?
Well, I mean, you know, 99% of the reason that most small businesses, well, if you put aside the fact that most people who go into small businesses don't know what they're doing, 99% of the reason that most small businesses fail is they don't have enough customers, right? That's the thing that makes a business go. In the absence of customers, you have no business. And so the surest thing we could do to the economy today to provide more customers to small business is raise the minimum wage. Because here's the thing, if you run a business, if you run a small business, I don't care what kind it is, the percentage of customers you have that are earning the federal minimum wage of $7.25 are zero. Because if you are trying to make a living on $7.25, you are not going out to restaurants to eat. You are not getting haircuts at the salon. You are not sending mom flowers on Mother's Day. You're not. You're sending some money to your landlord. You're giving your grocery money, if you're not on food stamps, to Kroger. And maybe if you're lucky, you're spending a few healthcare dollars. So if you care about small business and creating a pro-small business environment, the shrewdest thing we can do, the most pro-business thing we can do is find a way to make sure that every worker earns more money. And look, let me give you an example. So the orthodox view is that higher wages kill jobs. So as you may know, we passed a $15 minimum wage in Seattle recently. I was very much, part of that effort. And we heard from tons and tons of restaurants. We're like, oh, impossible, we can never do it. We'll all go out of business. So here's the thing. Virtually every other, like you go to Alabama or Georgia, the federal tipped minimum is $2.13. In Washington State, it's $9.32. So in Washington State, tipped workers, who make up restaurant workers, right, earn 427% more than they do in Alabama. So if the orthodox view was correct, first of all, Washington State should have slid into the ocean, right? And Georgia and Alabama, they would be like these beacons of amazing economics. And yet, Washington State is currently generating more small business jobs than any state in the nation. Seattle's restaurant business, booming, crazy. You know why? Because when restaurants pay restaurant workers enough so that even they can afford to shop in restaurants, that's not bad for the restaurant business. That's good for the restaurant business, despite what some short-sighted restaurant owners may tell you. Now, here's the thing. I've run 35 different businesses. I'm always asked in the press, well, I've talked to, 99% of restaurant owners say that this will be bad for business. So I have a 14-year-old boy. Maybe some of you will identify. So I can tell you that 99% of 14-year-old boys agree that homework is a useless and costly exercise and an obliteration of their liberties. and that's because 14-year-old boys can instantly calculate the cost of doing homework, but not the benefits, even though the benefits overwhelm the costs. In the same way, any business person can instantly calculate the costs of rising wages, but they can't calculate the benefits of operating in an economy where everybody makes more money. They can't risk adjust for the fact that everybody will have to do the same thing. They can't risk adjust for the fact that now there'll be less price pressure and less margin pressure and so on and so forth. So when you weigh it in your head, even sensible people are like, holy cow, how is this all going to work? And yet it does. If it didn't, Somalia would be awesome because you can buy a ham sandwich there for 10 cents, and Switzerland would suck because they cost 15 bucks. But clearly, that's not true. Clearly, there is a choice to be made between a death spiral economy where wages go lower and product pricing has to go lower, or a virtuous cycle economy of higher and higher wages and higher prices.
I wanted to take exception, if I may, to a couple of your claims. One, your phone is a poor substitute for the library, and it does not include anything like...
Let me guess, a librarian?
Okay. My wife is. And secondly, I thought you helped yourself to this very romantic theme. You said, most apps are solving some problem. I beg to differ. I think most apps are Angry Birds, or there's some game. They're not, and I think it's representative in the following sense. I wonder, I mean, as a matter of historical fact, it was not the capitalists who ended child labor. And I think you are saying something like, if they had understood true capitalism, it would be the capitalists who ended child labor. But I just wonder what your answer to that is. And here's another question. I mean, people talk about capitalism and the mail now, right? And one problem is the people who need the mail most are the ones who are least interesting to companies, right? You're
Yes.
not going to make money off the recluse in the hills who really needs his Social Security. And is it that if I understand true capitalism, I will want to end child labor from those grounds and I'll care about the guy in the hill? Or is it that my capitalist thinking is going to need to be supplemented by some stronger extra moral fiber, which you could read about at the library?
Yeah, exactly. Okay. So I'll give you the point about the phone in the library. I'm going to contest your point about Angry Birds because I think that Angry Birds is every bit a solution to a human problem. Look, the point of life, well, I may be alone in this room in thinking that the point of life is fun. Like, the point of life is to have a life which doesn't suck. And
Not at the expense of everyone else.
so says the philosopher. Absolutely. But Angry Birds is not at the expense of everybody else. And entertainment, art, games should be a core of what we get to devote our time to. And you know, look, chess may be a better game than Angry Birds, but that's a normative discussion that's complex and difficult to sort out. But here's the thing. When I was a kid, you know, if I wanted a toy, my mom had to drive to the store and buy me a physical object, usually at great expense. And today, my 12-year-old daughter can download an app for free, and I don't think that that's a bad thing. But finally, the most important, I think, the more substantive question you asked is, and I'll just sort of rephrase it back to you, which is capitalism wants to solve problems where the money is, and often the money isn't where it should be.
Damn straight.
Right? Okay.
Yeah.
Absolutely true. And part of the problem, again, you know, these are all social constructs, right? We, as a society, get to decide to a certain extent where the money is. Like, we get to decide where the money is. And we get to define what prosperity is. And you know, accepting, so there is a difference between policies that benefit a few capitalists narrowly and what benefits capitalism generally. Again, this all comes back to the trickle-down idea that the richer the rich get, the better off everything else will be, and the bigger the big get, the better off everything will be. This is a lie. That's a construction made by the rich and powerful for the rich and the powerful, and as long as you believe it, they're in awesome shape, right? Look, private equity investors like me are taxed at a 15% rate, not the 39% rate that people are taxed who work. Why? Because they persuaded you that what they do is special, and that the richer they got, the better it would be for you. And you nodded. You did. You nodded. You've been nodding for decades. And if you want to change things, you have to stop nodding. You have to stop saying, You have to start saying, no, 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 no. Prosperity does not trickle down from the top. You are not special. We are. Prosperity is built from the middle out. We should pay the 15% tax rate, and you should pay the 39% tax rate. And that's what the game is.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Hey, Nick. So I agree with you that your theory of the middle out is a lot better than the trickle down effect, and I'm completely with you. But with your claim that the middle out economy is better than the trickle down effect, how would you suggest persuading those who have seriously benefited from the trickle down economics to abandon what they've been doing for the last 40 years or so, and try to embrace what you're saying is a better way of doing economy?
Yeah, so to be clear, you don't need the top 1% of earners to agree. You need 51% of everybody else to agree, right? And the problem is, and it's so interesting because I've been litigating this stuff for a long time. You think that you don't agree, but you do agree with them, right? And the actions you take every day reinforce these old frames. All we need to do is persuade 55% of voting Americans that prosperity is built from the middle out, doesn't trickle down from the top. You don't need to worry about the top 1/10 of 1%, right? And again, the heart of the problem is that most Americans, poor and rich, believe that old story. That Speaker of the House John Boehner can stand in front of a big audience and say, if you raise the price of employment, guess what happens? You get less of it. And people don't chuck tomatoes at him, right? I just want you to think about that phrase. If you raise the price of employment, guess what happens? You get less of it. He is literally saying that if poor people get richer, that will be bad for our country and the economy. That is insane. Put aside the moral point. Like, who will buy the stuff? Who will buy the stuff if people don't have any money anymore? It's insane. It's just ridiculous. But people believe it because they've been told it. And the challenge is to get people to stop believing. I know I have to go. I just want to one anecdote. So as you know, we did this $15 minimum wage thing, right? And we did it, well, you may not know, but you know, this small group of us decided that we were going to spin up the national minimum wage fight around the country. Started in SeaTac, went to Seattle. It's happening everywhere. You must know. LA just passed $15 for hotel workers. San Francisco's going to do it. Chicago, it's going to go everywhere. But here's the thing. When I first, and the reason we did it is we wanted to find a policy way of instantiating middle-out economics. The idea that the more money workers had, the better it would be for business, and the more workers we create. I talked to everybody in the minimum wage fight. People have been working on it for decades. And not one of them had ever considered the possibility of raising the minimum wage more than $1. You know why? Because if workers earn more money, then we'll have less employment. I'm not kidding. Like, the people who had devoted their lives to raising the minimum wage in our country had completely and totally accepted that explanation. And the only reason they could offer to increase the minimum wage was because they felt sorry for poor people. Well, that is a crappy way to advance an important policy in a democracy, right? And it took us to be like, you know, if we raise the minimum wage to $15, you know, like, think about all the extra money that companies would have because of all these customers, and my God, then they'd need more workers, and by the way, then taxpayers wouldn't have to pay for the food stamps that all these low-wage workers are earning. And now all of a sudden you're in a different policy regime, and you're talking about stuff that people can really care about. But here's the thing. Even the people theoretically on my side have accepted this frame. It's so, so, so deep. I'll tell you one more story. One of my very closest collaborators met with Valerie Jarrett, the president's closest advisor, the day after I think they won, and they're all like, woo, yay. And he's like, well, you know, the middle class is still shrinking, and what's our plan? No plan. And he said, why don't we increase the minimum wage? And she said, we could never do that right now. Our economy is too fragile. Right? Valerie Jarrett's not a bad person. She's a super smart person. An incredible public servant. But she really believes that if we raise wages for workers, that would be bad for the economy. It goes deep, man. And that's the challenge for you. I mean, you may not care. If you care, that's your challenge. So, thank you.
I ask you to join me in thanking our speaker, a couple of things. One is Nick is gracious enough to agree to give a second lecture up in Spokane this evening at 7:30 at the Fox Theater. We'll have a reception and a book signing after up there, so you're all welcome to come up there as well. Unfortunately, that means we don't have time to do a reception for him down here because we have to make our way up to Spokane. Just as a token of appreciation, it's hard to know what to get a guy who flies in on his private jet that he might need.
Give me another jet.
But as a small token of our appreciation, we just have this little gift, hopefully to remember this his excellent lecture today. And then also, there's one part of his biography I left out at the beginning, and that is his philosophy degree came from another institution on the other side of the state that we don't talk about. But for today, we wanted to make him an honorary Cougar. All right, join me now.